but originally from Burlington. Went to school at Tulane, spent a little time in the Army, a few years in Wall Street, kind of have a varied background. And he's going to talk a little bit about Nemaha Water Services. Hold on. You've seen a lot of these water trucks back and forth. You've probably seen some of these the water wells that are out there. He's a good guy to ask those questions when he finishes talking. He sent me a diagram of some of the way that stuff works, and it really surprised me. And Michael's he's looking to do some stuff here at Northwestern, maybe some funding research, and so we're kind of trying to work through that together. And it's I think I've known Michael for about 6 months now. Very nice young man. I think some of you know him, some of his relatives, and he'll talk about that. But without further ado, Michael Morford.
So my brother James and his partner in crime, Jared Ackerman, are handing out. There's not much in there, but I like the folder. And, my father-in-law, I'll give free advertising. My father-in-law does printing, and he made those folders, and I thought those were pretty slick. But the graphic that Skeeter referenced is what's in there. It's a very brief explanation of just the pure basics behind saltwater disposal facilities. But before I get to that, the most important question I have is, I've been having problems with a 5-letter word for appropriate game, if anyone can help me out on that afterwards. So yeah, I went to Burlington High School, grew up, Amarita is our farm. Many people here in Alva know our great uncle, the late wonderful Tom Morford, and his nephew, Jim Morford, was our father, who was the battery commander here in Alva at the Guard Unit before he progressed on. Eventually was the Deputy Adjutant General for the State Oklahoma Guard. So James and I brag about him more than he brags about himself. But it's wonderful for us to, whenever we get to come back home and talk to people in the community. As Skeeter referenced, after Burlington, I was all enrolled to go to Oklahoma State. And then Tulane University in New Orleans sent a thing saying, come here and we'll pay the rest of your bills. And I said, Mom, what's Tulane? And she said, this is where you go to school. So that's how I got to New Orleans, and it was a wonderful experience. I got my engineering degree and then finished and got my MBA real quick before I had to do some active duty. And then immediately went into Wall Street, was an investment banker focused on oil and gas companies for the duration of my 15-year career. And that 15-year career would be obviously interrupted with training or deployment in 03. So it was kind of my blend for my career with those two paths. About a few years ago, started to get very disgusted with Wall Street's always been a dirty business, but it's just got worse and worse and worse. And I got tired of taking cold showers to make myself feel good at night. So I started to look for what I could do to leave Wall Street, and knew I wanted to do something in the oil and gas industry. About 16 months ago, was actually at the State House talking to Mike Jackson, another Burlington alum, who's now our House Pro Temp, and he referenced some legislation regarding saltwater, and that got me on my due diligence path to today. What I find fascinating about what we're about to discuss briefly in the macro is, of all the things related to the oil and gas industry in the U.S., saltwater, to me, represents the most unique aspect. Unlike everything else, which is handled by the Mineral Management Service or Oklahoma Corporation Commission, saltwater is ultimately under the purview of the EPA. So you have a unique clash of two different groups and two different interests when you deal with saltwater. And even though saltwater is not stuff that you would drink, it still is competing with freshwater, as we'll get into in a second. So you've got a policy issue, especially if you look at the drought conditions, the amount of water being pulled from freshwater sources for the fracking. So that really drew to my nature of wanting to get directly involved with this major issue that I believe is going to become worse and worse and worse. I believe there's going to be increasing state and federal mandates and regulations. I believe that what we've heard so far in the media, the sensationalism surrounding fracking, is going to increase even if there's less intelligence behind some of the arguments. It's not going to go away. And all of those things was what really led me to want to focus exclusively on the water that is used in the oil and gas industry. So here I was finally with an opportunity to form my own company, and I could do it anywhere. I live in Dallas, but I decided I'm putting it here in Alva, because I would rather work with people that I know and people who know my name than somewhere in Dallas where I'm just another person. And now I'm not going to leave Dallas because I found that more precious than gold, platinum, or oil is free grandparenting babysitting. And I will stay there for as long as my in-laws are around. So that's what we've done. We formed the Nemaha Water Services on the surface. We deal just with the disposal water, and that's the part I'll try to keep macro regarding. Like Skeeter mentioned, you see these water hauling trucks going up and down the road. A few people probably either have been approached or have maybe a disposal water well on your ground. And this stuff should not be taken lightly. If you've got, this stuff is called salt water, but that's a loose term. There are 27 known carcinogens in this stuff, from iron, bromine, sulfur, iodine. It's toxic. If it comes into contact with the skin for a long time, it will cause burn. If it gets spilled onto any land, the land becomes unusable. Oil spill you can clean up. Saltwater spill, you're done. So there's some major issues, and what the industry has been trying to do up to now is pipe it wherever possible, but because we're into a lot of new basins, you're having to truck this stuff. So that's what's really causing a big problem. And I think Sandridge and Chesapeake are understanding the magnitude of the problem, but it's still a long way from understanding to really addressing the problem. Now, I understand just yesterday, Tom Ward was here presenting in Alva, and he too referenced saltwater disposal wells as a really major element to the future of this region. I think it's important to understand that it's very unique to the Woods Alfalfa Grant County. Out of all the producing resource basins in North America, this region produces more water per barrel than any other region by magnitudes of volume. So whereas up in the Bakken shales, you may produce 1 barrel of water for 1 barrel of oil, here you sometimes will produce 10 to 15 barrels of water for 1 barrel of oil. You really are in the business of water, and you happen to deal with a lot of oil on the side. That's really what Sandridge and Chesapeake and others here are dealing with. So that's why it's somewhat unique here to Alva, but that's another reason why I feel like there's such a great opportunity for Nemaha to try to step in and address an industry that is highly fragmented. It's up until now been dominated by mom and pops who own just a single facility or a trucking company, a local company that maybe has 2 or 3, and they only have them to really facilitate their trucks. Yet as this industry evolves, there's going to be an accelerated demand curve for more and more disposal facilities around the country, and you're also going to have more and more volume needs. It's just the sheer nature of the hydraulic fracturing and what you do once you fracture that formation. Because when you fracture the formation, you're effectively unlocking an ancient ocean that the hydrocarbons were in when they got locked centuries ago. So you're not only getting that water back that you fracked, but you're pulling out groundwater that will otherwise would have never seen the light of day ever again. And that's why there's such unique chemistry behind it. Each basin has unique salt water to it. You can't just apply the same technologies again and again. Some places, centrifugal work helps clean up the water. Other places, it's an ionizer. Others, it's just a boiling system. So each basin's unique. Each basin's unique in terms of the chemical makeup, in terms of the volume of water produced, but it's an issue, and it's an issue that's not going away. So we're trying to take the lead on this. Whereas a lot of other companies that are looking to do exactly what we're doing, which is acquire or build as many assets in the region as possible, because there is a lot of profit opportunity in there, we also want to be the leader in looking towards recycling. Because every barrel of water you can recycle that's coming out of the ground is a barrel you do not pull out of fresh water sources for the frack. So it may not be a one-to-one on paper, but it is a one-to-one in terms of savings for a community, all of western Oklahoma, that's facing pretty significant drought conditions. So those are the forward-looking issues that we're trying to address that we believe we're at the forefront of, and what we can't seem to find other companies looking to do. So that's why it's important for myself and as we bring employees on here locally to be engaged in the community, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about what a saltwater well is and what it isn't. And there's an easy response to try to stop or prevent a new facility from going in. And that's understandable, but if we can be the good stewards of the environment and show that we're looking towards safety first, regulations, how to recycle the stuff, then hopefully we can be the agent of change from within the industry. Case in point, Weatherford, just like Alva, smaller community, really dependent upon the oil and gas industry, and just last month they effectively stopped a new disposal well from getting drilled. You would think if there's any community that would support a new commercial disposal facility, it would be a Weatherford, but that's how much lack of information is out there. And when you see random news bits about possible earthquake causes, the pollution into the freshwater sources, where you've seen footage of methane being lit out of water, it's easy to understand and create concerns. And hopefully we're as engaged as we can be in this community so that people who have questions will come to us and we can answer them honestly. And if there is an issue, we want to be the first to say, yeah, there's reason to be concerned with this facility, or what issue just occurred is a problem that's got to get addressed. We don't want to just gloss things over and say, don't worry, let us do it and we'll take care of it. So that's the real quick and dirty. I've got 9 minutes left, and I usually like to roll through these sorts of comments quickly because I much prefer to talk about whatever anyone has a question regarding. About what we're doing Nemaha. If anyone's curious about the commodity pricing and why I have confidence that you're going to see continued drilling program here in the Northwest for quite some time. It's all dependent on the price of crude oil. Any questions that people may have, would love to answer that. Yes, sir.
Over in eastern Oklahoma, specifically around Craig,
Yeah.
Seminole, and all that, they've had saltwater disposal wells for as long as the oil industry's been in.
Right.
Is there not a way to go in and test those grounds to make sure that, I know in the past it wasn't done correctly, but I mean, to say, or to study to make sure that we don't do it the way we used to do it?
Most of those wells, so a saltwater disposal well is technically called an underground injection control, UIC. That's the way the EPA categorized it. There's 5 categories of UICs. One of them is like nuclear waste, which isn't allowed anymore. Class 2 is the UIC that is pertinent to oil and gas. The wells you're referring to are UICs. They're Class 2 saltwater wells, but they're actually used more for injection purposes for water flooding. So they serve a different need. That water's going down to help elevate the hydrocarbons back up. So it's not necessarily a direct correlation to what's happening here. That being said, the UIC division within the Oklahoma Corporation Commission does and is expected to test water quality in a circumference, half-mile circumference around each facility every year. Whether or not that gets done is a bigger question because of funding and manpower. But in theory, that's supposed to be happening, and that's one of the reasons why we want to have a relationship with Northwestern and Southwestern, because we don't believe that's being done properly. We're hoping to create some funded research programs, almost stand-up institutes within the 2 universities, to start to create databases of this data so that it's more accessible to find out what are some of the issues in the past and what are some of the solutions.
Well, could you explain, I know this diagram shows that the water is pumped back into the ground.
Right.
Okay, and then it says it's tapped off and all that. But what is it that keeps that water from seeping out?
I'm a nerd, and I love this stuff. And what's real fascinating is usually you deposit down into, say, the Arbuckle Formation, which is the lowest formation before you hit what's known as the basement of the Precambrian. That formation is actually a rock sponge. As the crystals were forming, they tightened up. So after the bedrock above it had been laid, the spaces became more open. So hence you have greater permeability and porosity. When you dispose down into there, 2 things are occurring. One, it's not going anywhere else because you're maybe a mile beneath some of the water tables, or half a mile. And even if it were escaping, it's only escaping, say, 50 feet. So the likelihood of an actual properly created disposal well from contaminating another water source would be a scientific marvel because of the amount of ground it would have to traverse to actually get into the drinking water sources that are much, much higher in elevation. Yes?
If salt water has all these other minerals and such in it, is there any technology exists that would make reclamation of those minerals profitable?
Right. Yes and no. Everything is about scales of economy. We're trying to find out those answers because some of the solids in that water are of value if you can extract them cheap enough. Hence, when you get out to western Oklahoma, it's a unique spot in America where the iodine levels are so high that there are bromine plants and iodine plants just to extract those two chemicals, because the value for iodine in the medical industry and bromine in fire retardant is worth it. But that's a unique microcosm. But it shows that there's the potential. So it's all economies of scale, and the problem with a lot of the early attempts by the oil and gas industry to figure out how to extract the solids to resell or to recycle for frack use is they're trying to apply technologies at the wellhead. Well, that's not enough volume to ever achieve economies of scale. What we're trying to do is let's look at these same technologies, and if you put it at a disposal site, so it's more of a hub and spoke collection location, maybe you can achieve economies of scale to extract the solids and actually resale. So the answer is I believe that day is coming. It's just not there yet.
Can the salt water that's pumped out of one well not be used to frack the neighboring well?
Though frack water, frack water and salt water are two different things.
Yeah.
People refer to it as the same, but very different. The frack water is fresh water sources that have chemicals added to create the fissures. That water it's not hard to scrub that water to be able to get reused into a frack. This salt water, it's not been economic enough to make that happen. We hope that over the next 2, 5, 10 years, we can identify technologies for that exact purpose. Because every barrel we can keep from getting pulled out of streams or underground systems is a barrel saved. And if you talk to the Oklahoma Water Resources Board, it's a big issue. And no offense to oil and gas companies, but they don't really care. All they care about is just get the water, frack that well, make their returns on their investment. And I understand it in a vacuum of pure private capitalism, fine. But we're in an ecosystem with cattle, agriculture, people that need the same resource. And so that's why we're trying to be an agent of change from within, because right now the salt water can't be used for fracking. Oh, wow. I'm really good, huh? I answered every question.
So many, I've heard these newer wells, when they're drilling, especially when they're really good wells, they'll put the disposal well right on the site where they drill 3 or 4 wells or something.
Yeah. The cost of doing it just a price. So on this class 2, back to the class 2, where one's an injection well for water flood, another is an injection for private use. Sandridge or Chesapeake will do their own disposal well, and as long as the only water going into it is their water, then that's considered private. If it's a third party, then that's commercial. The only difference is the cost for a Sandridge or Chesapeake is about $1.1 million to put that hole in the ground. But the amount of water being produced per section is so prodigious that economically it makes sense, because the transportation cost is what eats you alive on the costs, on the economic side. Once you get away from this immediate Tri-County area, the economies fall apart, and you don't see private disposal wells like you do here by Sandridge and Chesapeake. I personally believe that you're going to start to see some forced changes to where Chesapeake and Sandridge are going to look at stop that practice and go third party. I hope they do, because I would prefer to not have a disposal well at every section, which is pretty much the way they want to operate. I mean, logistically it makes sense. If you're just an engineer with paper and you have a quarter section and you know you need a disposal well, put it in the middle, drill your 4 wells, and it's a very elegant setup. But I don't think long term that that's going to be a continued business practice as regulations get more intense and as they basically think, oh, it's just $1 million. But if you multiply that by 60, all right, that's $60 million sitting on your balance sheet that you could be using for your drilling program. You're not in the business of disposing water, you're in the business of drilling for oil. So between Chesapeake and Sandridge's own balance sheet issues, I think that will help be a catalyst for slowly migrating away from their own disposal wells. But that's just Michael Morford gut thinking on the issue.
I'm kind of one of those dirty kind of guys. What type of technology would need to exist to reclaim those minerals?
Well, Devon is taking a real active approach in this, because they see value when they're looking at the water the way we are, which is it is as important of a resource as the hydrocarbon itself. One of the things you can do just to get the solids is have evaporation ponds. And that's nothing more than just scattering the water in a contained area and letting the water evaporate off and collecting the solids. I don't think that you can be that efficient because the amount of evaporation that would be required is pretty significant. But that's at the front end, the most simplistic approach is being applied. There are some newer high-end centrifuges, actually some being out near Woodward that are being attempted. I mean, these are big centrifuges and they spin the solids out of the water and extract it that way. We are actively trying to find out if there's anything coming out of R&D or any small startup company that maybe has figured out a better, more simple solution to this, because it could really be an opportunity.
Your company is wanting to put in commercial disposal wells, or already has them, or?
I don't foresee us looking to do much new commercial disposal facility construction in this immediate area, because there's already enough supply just here. I do know that we are going to be needing to put facilities in, new ones, around Grady County, Chickasha area, heading northeast towards Lincoln County. There's a swath where the drilling programs are heading. The saltwater industry, the water management industry hasn't maintained that pace, and there's going to be a need. So here, no. Company-wide, yes.
So here locally, I mean, are you trying to?
We're just looking to acquire existing facilities.
Existing facilities?
Yeah. There's one west of Lahoma that we're in negotiations to obtain. At this point, once you get into that point, once you find someone who has a disposal facility, you could have an uneconomic wellbore that could be converted into a disposal facility. We're interested in that because that saves you $700,000, $800,000 of drilling costs. If there's someone who happens to have a commercial disposal facility that would be interested in a takeout, or maybe we have an earn with them so they stay on board, manage the process, continue to make some money, but we give them a nice check to take over ownership of that facility. We're interested in that. Or in a situation where maybe a Sandridge or a Chesapeake has a private one, they would sell back to us and we convert to a commercial. So that's where we're thinking, because what's the point in poking more and more holes up around here when there's already enough holes that have been dug?
My understanding that Sandridge drilled the disposal well in Woods County, be 2820, section 32. Would you then buy that disposal well from them or something like that?
If they would sell it, sure. Now, I really respect what Sandridge is trying to do in this area, in the sense of they are trying to be community. Not all operators are that way. That being said, a dirty little secret with both Chesapeake and Sandridge is that when they do their own disposal well, it costs them $1 million, but then they have free disposal, and they probably are piping, so they save the money on the trucking. Then they turn around and charge their non-operating working interest partners for the disposal fee. And that is becoming such a good source of revenue that it's been saving them a little bit on their earnings statements. And it's a little bit of a cover-up, because if Wall Street realized that a significant amount of their income was not from oil but from water, they would say, are you guys that economic or not? And there would probably be a pretty significant pressure on the stock price. So they don't like to talk about that, but it's a dirty little secret. At the same time, the operators that are working with them that are getting charged feel like they're getting taken advantage of. So that's another reason why I see that maybe migrating away, because a Panhandle Oil and Gas out of Oklahoma City refuses to do any drilling with Chesapeake or Sandridge for that very reason. Why should we be charged like we're just a random customer to dispose of the water you're disposing of for free? We'll help pay for the cost of the facility. Don't charge us on the back end into perpetuity. So if Sandridge would sell us, sure, I'd be all for buying it. And there will come a point, I believe, where they may have to. Until then, we'll just be looking for opportunities with smaller operators where they can't afford to put in their own disposal well. They need the services of a third-party vendor. That's where our likely first moves are.
Are you saying that they're going to be forced into selling those because EPA or whatever doesn't actually believe that they're doing the necessary steps to keep that safe, and they think that they have more control over a third party or commercial facility?
It's a combination. I think that you're going to see pressure from within the industry. These non-op working interest partners start to say, we're not partnering with you guys anymore until you back off with this practice. So I think there'll be internal pressures. I know there already are some. I think that their balance sheet will be a pressure where they say we could free up $50, $100 million of capital off of our balance sheet to redeploy. That's going to be an internal pressure. And then the third leg would be the EPA increasing mandates on not only monitoring the facility, but also there's already a discussion of mandates on some form of recycling. And if you get into any form of recycling mandate, private disposal wells can't meet that obligation. So I think it's a three-headed monster that will slowly converge and force the issue.
If you were to purchase the existing saltwater well, how do you price it?
Good old math. It's about the volume they're doing, the capacity that it's, depending on the size of the well, the integrity of that well that was created, the formation it's going into depends on, that's what dictates the amount of permitted capacity. There are some wells in Oklahoma that have a permitted capacity to dispose 50,000 barrels of water a day. I can't imagine being in front of that water faucet. Like, that's unbelievable pressures. Most disposal wells are permitted more around 5,000 to 8,000 barrels of water a day. Smaller well bore, less pressure being shoved down the hole, less risk for underground fractures. So if we have an opportunity to purchase, we would look at the volume that's already coming in, see the potential upside with the capacity, and just do a multiple on net cash flow. If I could buy something for 4 times EBITDA, let's say something's netting $500,000 a year, $2 million seems pretty fair to me. And if we need to, we'd do an earnout where we'd say, all right, $2 million plus over the next 4 years, we'll have a percent incremental payout to you, the seller, as long as we hit these milestones. So that's the sort of arrangements we're negotiating.
Is a normal truck, what do they haul, like
200? 130 barrels.
130. Out of that amount of salt water, what kind of oil do they?
Good question. I really didn't even get into that part of it. That's another thing that's interesting about the private disposal wells and why I think Sanders and Chesapeake over time will look at third party, because water and oil separate at the wellhead, and even the best separation, you're still going to have 0.25% up to 1% of oil still suspended in that water. And it only will come out with the addition of a chemical known as a surfactant, as well as time, letting it naturally separate out. In an old-fashioned well where you just went down to an oil deposit, you had millions of years that allowed water and oil to separate. You just drilled the oil, and when you pulled water, you knew you got the oil out. Now you're going into the source, and you're getting that stuff out at the same time, and you're trying to circumvent millions of years of separation. So usually a truckload coming in is going to have roughly 1% of oil. You layer in the surfactants, let it settle, have it go through a few filter tanks, and you can extract upwards of 1% of oil. Now, it's not WTI, light sweet crude sort of pricing, but even at a 20% discount, at 1% crude oil cuts, you're getting as much revenue from the sale of that oil as you do from the charging of the disposal water to begin with. So it just goes to show how valuable each hydrocarbon molecule is in that water.
These wells, it's free flow down, right? Do they have to be pumped?
Well, there's a natural vacuum on some of these wells that probably exists at between 800 to 1,200 barrels of water a day. That if that's all you were putting, it would just naturally free flow down. But when you have more volume you need to put down, that's why you'd have a pump, a triplex pump up at the surface to force it down. And that's where it's amazing to think about a 50,000 barrel a day. I would love to see the pump on that thing to force that much water down.
And then you'd have to have a lot of tanks to let that stuff settle out.
Correct.
Because I don't know how long you're talking about. A day or 8 hours,
a week. And also, if you think about just logistics, when a company fracks, and then in the completion process, that frack water flowback is enormous. Hundreds of thousands of barrels of water coming back up to the ground. So you need the tanks to store that water so that it's more of a supply game I'm not going to force it all down a hole in one day, but I'll collect it and then force it down over the next few weeks.
That water, the saltwater, I mean, when it's coming back up, I mean, I hear these guys say they're a flowback person or something, and they sit on the well until the flowback stops.
I may defer to my brother James because he dealt with some completion out in West Texas, but I think it's pretty noticeable. Like suddenly, that salt water is only going to be coming out when you're producing oil. So suddenly, when the water consistency changes and it's suddenly oil in there, that's the natural inclination that you've hit that trigger point. But I'm sure there's testing that's done that's just simple measurements right on the wellhead that just says, all right, we've got the majority of the flowback. That flowback will still trickle back out over the next few months, but it's really when you hit the tipping point of do we start the production of the oil now or not?
They don't like measure. I mean, if they put 10,000 barrels down there, they wait till they get 10,000 barrels back
You're
out.
only going to get about 30% of the water back. And each well's different. So they don't expect an exact amount of return volume. It's more of just, I think that's where it's more of an art than a science.
Is the same stuff they're driving around these trucks spreading on people's pastures?
No, that is mud, drilling mud. So drilling mud is a loose definition for the
So that's not salt water?
No, that's the sludge that's put down, when you've got the open hole in your drilling, if you were to hit a gas pocket and there's natural pressures, that's where you get blowouts. So that drilling mud, each well you have to measure to see how much weight is put into that mud to basically be a movable lid as the drilling string goes down.
Okay.
And when that stuff comes back up, Oklahoma, I'm amazed that Oklahoma allows soil farming is what they call it. That's a really polite term for it. It's a very environmentally disgusting process. No other state allows it.
And what's bad, I've had them, they've come and looked at our place, and I said, and I told them, I said, show me a place you're dumping on now. Show me a place that's 3 months old, and show me a place that's a year old.
Yes.
And what's bad is I couldn't really tell much difference from a year-old place and what my place looked like. I couldn't see, other than tracks. It didn't, I'm thinking salt would kill the ground up.
No, this is not salt, though. They claim that in certain more sandy soils, it's actually good for it, but...
Well, they were talking about best time to do it would be June, put it on your wheat ground, and then it got farmed in throughout the course of the year.
I don't know much about the mud and the soil farming, but it doesn't sound like something that I'd want to... there's some nasty stuff in there.
They're doing it nonstop.
Oh, I know.
Now, they've got quite a few hoops to jump through to get your place approved.
Yep.
They have to do all kinds of environmental...
I'd never even... It's so rare that I never even heard of the term soil farming until about a year ago. No, publicly traded companies don't talk about it. No other state does it. It's this little element of Oklahoma, and I don't know how it got started and why they allow it. And I maybe there's some benefits to it. I don't know. I can't speak very educated on the subject.
I know it's pretty prevalent around though.
You can't hardly script the soil around anywhere.
Which is true, right? That's true.
You can't screw it up.
You were talking about like Chesapeake using one of their private wells.
Yes.
And having other people dispose in it.
Yes.
Where's the borderline where that becomes commercial?
It's not other people. So if Chesapeake is drilling one well, they own 50%. And then they farm out 20% to Hunt Oil and 20% to T-Booms. That's non-op working interest is the terminology. So you're an oil and gas company, but you're not operating it, but you have a working interest. So it's the same water coming out of the same well. But Chesapeake, as they put it down, just is measuring it, and they're like, okay, out of this 50 barrels, half of it is ours for free. The other half, we're going to charge all of our working interest partners to do what we just did. And that's where it's starting to become a very sore spot with all the other operators in the region. They're putting up millions of dollars to participate in the drilling well. And they're quite frustrated about it.
Does a saltwater well have a lifespan or life expectancy? Does it get to the point that it's saturated? And
I know that I've run long, so I apologize. I'll keep talking.
It's okay.
It's a fascinating subject, and in theory, you would achieve what's known as hydrostatic pressure, where you're just not going to be able to, like a balloon, you just can't put any more down. There are disposal wells in Texas and Oklahoma that have been around for 60, 70 years. If you dispose on the right formation properly and have a good well bore, and you're not putting a lot of paraffins down the well, you can dispose into perpetuity.
Okay.
We are using 20-year lifespans, but that's just because accounting, you sometimes need to have a lifespan on something. But it's pretty amazing how this subsurface formation can absorb that much water for that long. All right, I know I went way over. My apologies. But I appreciate everybody taking the time to chat. I hope to be more involved in the community, and hopefully we are a job creator. We're only banking locally. These are big things for me, getting to come back home and start up a company. We don't Chase and JP Morgan, I had them enough on Wall Street. Alva State Bank and Bank Central, those are banks. So hopefully we'll be a good steward, and I appreciate everyone listening to us.